You know, we see countries on a map every single day, but they weren't always there. What we think of as a country is actually this incredible story. Thousands of years of, well, everything. Migration, war, culture, power. So how did we get from a world of wandering tribes to the map we see on our phones today? Let's dive in and find out.
Okay, so just look at a world map for a second. It feels so solid, right? Like it's always been this way. But have you ever really stopped to wonder, why? Why these lines? Why does this country end here and that one start there? The answers? Well, they're buried deep in history. A history of conflict, big ideas, and a whole lot of power.
Yeah, this wasn't an accident, not at all. These borders were built. They were drawn, fought over, and negotiated piece by painstaking piece. Every single line on that map tells a story of decisions, of struggles, and yeah, sometimes even cooperation. So let's start peeling back those layers and see how this whole thing came to be.
All right, so to really get this, we've got to go way, way back to the very beginning. I'm talking about a time when there were no borders, no passports. The whole idea of a country just wasn't a thing.
You see, for the vast majority of human history, people lived in these small, tight-knit groups, tribes and clans. And survival? That was a team sport. Territory wasn't something you owned. It was something you followed. It moved with the seasons, with the animals you hunted. The idea of drawing a permanent line in the sand and saying, "This is ours," well, that would have sounded absolutely crazy.
But then, everything changed. And the game changer was agriculture. The moment we started farming, we started settling down. Those settlements grew from villages into cities. And with cities, you need a new way to organize things. Enter the kingdom. And for the very first time, borders became a real, tangible thing. They often followed the landscape. That river is the edge of our land, or those mountains mark the boundary. But you know how it is. Just staying put inside those nice, natural borders, well, that wasn't going to be enough for some people. Ambition started to kick in. And that led to a whole new era, one that wasn't about defending what you had, but about massive expansion and conquest.
And this is a really key difference in how people thought about power. A kingdom, it's basically playing defense. You're just trying to protect your turf. But an empire is all offense. The goal is to grow, to conquer, to swallow up new lands, and bring all sorts of different people under one rule. And yeah, that usually happened by force.
And wow, did this drive for expansion create some absolute giants. We're talking about the big ones, right? The Roman Empire, the Persian Empire, the incredible Chinese dynasties, the Islamic empires. These guys didn't just take over land, they spread their languages, their laws, their ways of building things, stuff that, believe it or not, still has an echo in our world today.
But here's the thing about empires. They have a shelf life. History tells us this over and over again. No empire lasts forever. They get too big, too complex, and eventually they fall apart. Think of it like a giant vase shattering. When Rome fell, when the Mongol Empire collapsed, these huge powers just crumbled into a bunch of smaller pieces, and that completely redrew the map all over again.
So with these giant empires gone, it kind of created this opening, a space for a brand new and really powerful idea to grow. And it was a huge mental shift. It was about moving away from just being a subject who's loyal to a king, to feeling like you're part of something bigger, something more personal.
And this was the birth of what we call national identity. For the first time, people started to see themselves as connected to millions of other people they'd never even met. Not because they all served the same ruler, but because they felt like they were part of the same people, a nation, bound together by the shared idea of who they were.
So what is that glue? What holds a nation together? Well, it really boils down to three main things. First, you've got a shared language so everyone can communicate. Then there's a common culture and often a shared religion that creates those social bonds. And finally, and this one's huge, a unifying history, a shared story of wins and losses that makes everyone feel like they're in it together.
Okay, so once you have this powerful idea of a nation, the next logical step is to say, okay, where is it? Where does our nation live? And that's when people started trying to give it a physical shape. It meant getting out the pens and, well, often the swords, to literally draw the lines on the map.
So how did those lines actually get drawn? For the most part, it happened in three ways. The most straightforward? War. The winner just takes a pen and redraws the map. Simple as that. Then you have treaties, which is where everyone gets together after the fighting is over to make those new borders official.
And then there was colonialism. This is when powerful countries just went and drew lines all over other people's lands, usually without asking or even caring who lived there.
And the age of colonialism, I mean, it happened on a staggering scale. For hundreds of years, a handful of European powers basically carved up the entire planet. But then, in the 20th century, the whole system started to come apart at the seams. All over the world, colonies fought for their freedom, they won their independence, and boom, a whole wave of brand new countries appeared on the map.
But the legacy of that era is complicated, and it's still with us. A lot of these new countries were stuck with the borders that their old colonial rulers had drawn, and these were often totally artificial lines that would slice right through the middle of an ethnic group or force two rival groups to live together in the same country. And that, right there, planted the seeds for a lot of the conflict and instability we still see in some parts of the world.
So that whole journey, from tribes to empires, from nations to colonies, that brings us pretty much up to the present day, to the world we recognize. But it would be a huge mistake to think the story ends here.
Today, we have this system, a kind of global agreement. You've got organizations like the United Nations, right? They provide a way for countries to formally recognize each other, to say, yes, you exist, and you have the right to govern yourselves. And that brings a certain amount of stability to the whole thing. But, and this is the important part, that stability doesn't mean the map is set in stone. We have to remember, borders are not permanent. They can and they do still change. Sometimes through war, sometimes through peaceful agreements, sometimes when one country splits into two. The map is always a work in progress.
So as you can see, making the world map wasn't just one thing that happened. It's been this epic, sprawling story playing out for thousands of years. We went from wandering tribes to massive empires to the nations we know today. And the key takeaway is, it's not over, not by a long shot. The map of the world is still being written, right now. Which really just leaves us with one big question, doesn't it? What's the next chapter?